When you hear the word physicist, which names come to mind? Even people who aren't familiar with science often think of Einstein, Tesla, Schrödinger, or Curie. And of course, when it comes to someone who laid the foundation of modern science, you can't leave out Isaac Newton. Through Newtonian mechanics, humanity finally began to understand the physical laws that govern our universe. But chemistry also has someone who reshaped the entire field, a figure whose influence in chemistry rivals Newton's impact on physics. And unlike many scientists, his life story is just as dramatic as his scientific achievements. He helped establish the foundations of modern chemistry, and above all, he created the periodic table, a framework that revealed the underlying order of the chemical world and guided the future direction of the entire discipline. Today's story is about the Russian chemist Dmitri Mendeleev. Welcome to Dr.SciVera Studio. Let's explore the life and legacy of one of history's greatest chemists. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and let's dive right in. Dmitri Mendeleev was born in the Siberian city of Tobolsk, a place long known as a gateway for Russian expansion into Siberia. It was here in Tobolsk that Mendeleev was born on February 8, 1834, to Ivan Pavlovich Mendeleev and Maria Dmitrievna Mendeleeva. The exact number of his siblings varies between sources. Some accounts say he was one of 14 surviving children, while others mention a total of 17 children at birth. What all records agree on is that he was the youngest in a remarkably large family. His upbringing cannot be understood without looking at his parents. His father, Ivan Mendeleev, was the principal of a local school and helped create a strong academic atmosphere at home. His mother, Maria Mendeleeva, grew up in what was considered a stable middle-class family for the time. Despite living in an era when Russian society offered very few educational opportunities to women, she taught herself by quietly following her brother's studies. She was known for her intellectual curiosity and forward-thinking mindset. Unfortunately, around the time Mendeleev was about 2 years old, his father, Ivan Mendeleev, lost his eyesight. After this happened, the responsibility of supporting the family shifted entirely to his mother, Maria Mendeleeva. She took over the glassworks that her own family had operated and managed it herself to provide for her children. Considering the conservative atmosphere of 19th century Russia, it was extremely rare for a woman to run a factory and support a large family, and it speaks volumes about her strength and determination. She cared for her blind husband and looked after many children at the same time, yet she never gave up on their education. She especially believed that Dmitri needed to use learning as a way to shape his future, and she instilled this conviction deeply in him. Many historians note that behind Mendeleev's remarkable scientific achievements stood his mother's unwavering dedication and resolve. As Maria took on the responsibility of both the factory and the household, young Mendeleev naturally spent much of his time at the glassworks. According to various accounts, even at a very young age, he quickly understood the processes involved in making and coloring glass. Seeing this, his mother believed that he had exceptional powers of observation and understanding, and she became determined to give him a proper higher education. Mendeleev's early curiosity about observation and experimentation later became a key foundation of his scientific approach. School records also show that he was exceptional in subjects like mathematics and physics, while his performance in literature and language classes was noticeably weaker. These early tendencies clearly hinted at the direction his academic path would eventually take. Another tragedy struck the family in those difficult years. In 1847, when Mendeleev was about 15 years old, his father, Ivan Mendeleev, passed away. Around the same time, the glassworks that his mother managed was destroyed in a fire, leaving the family without any stable source of income. In this desperate situation, his mother Maria made a remarkable decision. In 1849, she gathered Dmitri and his sister and decided to move to Moscow, driven by a single goal: to give her children a proper higher education. The distance from Tobolsk to Moscow was roughly between 2,200 and 3,000 kilometers, depending on the route, and the journey required crossing the Ural Mountains, which rise to about 1,895 meters. Even today, this would be a demanding trip, and making such a journey in 19th century Siberia required extraordinary courage. After reaching Moscow, Mendeleev attempted to enter Moscow State University, one of the most prestigious universities in Russia. However, despite the long and difficult journey, he faced another barrier. At the time, Russian universities had restrictions on applicants from other regions, and because he was from Siberia, he was not allowed to enroll. But his mother did not give up. Realizing that studying in Moscow might not be possible, she made another bold decision. She took Mendeleev and moved again, this time to St. Petersburg, about 600 kilometers north of Moscow. When they arrived, Mendeleev tried applying to several institutions, but most of them rejected him, just as in Moscow. Even after repeated rejections in St. Petersburg, his mother persisted. She sought help from one of her late husband's acquaintances, and through that connection, Dmitri was accepted into the St. Petersburg Main Pedagogical Institute, an important teacher training institution of the time. It was not the elite university they had originally hoped for, but it was a significant triumph for a family that had endured so much. However, life brought yet another hardship. Only about 3 months after he entered the institute, Mendeleev's mother, Maria Dmitrievna Mendeleeva, passed away. Different records give different causes, including heart disease and tuberculosis, but what is certain is that she died shortly after securing a path for her son's education. According to several accounts, her final words to him were a message of discipline and integrity. Do not fall into illusions. Let your actions speak louder than your words. Never neglect the pursuit of truth. Mendeleev kept these words close to his heart. Looking back at his life, many historians agree that his mother's strength, principles, and refusal to yield to unfairness shaped Mendeleev's own progressive views and his tendency to challenge the conventions of his time. After losing his mother, Mendeleev was essentially on his own, but this became a turning point. He devoted himself even more deeply to his studies and began walking the true path of a scientist. His life is often described as having 2 chapters: the years when his mother supported him and the years after her death. Her influence had formed the foundation of everything that came after. Yet his struggles continued. About 2 years after his mother's death, Mendeleev was diagnosed with tuberculosis and was reportedly told he had only a few months to live. Tuberculosis bacteria would not be identified until 1882, and effective treatments would not be developed until the 1950s, so the disease was extremely difficult to overcome at that time. Even so, he did not abandon his studies. In 1855, at the age of 21, he graduated from the Main Pedagogical Institute with excellent marks and began working as a science teacher. His first teaching post was in the city of Simferopol in the region known as the Crimean Peninsula. However, only 1 week after he began teaching, the situation changed drastically. The Crimean War, which lasted from 1853 to 1856, intensified, and British forces landed on the Crimean coast. The school in Simferopol closed because of the war, and Mendeleev had to move to Odessa in the north to continue teaching temporarily. However, Mendeleev eventually left teaching and returned to St. Petersburg in 1856 to study chemistry more seriously. In 1857, he entered the University of St. Petersburg, the same institution he had once attempted to enter with his mother. His health improved gradually, and through intense study and research, he graduated with excellent results and continued his scientific work at the university. However, Russia's scientific environment at that time was severely underdeveloped. There was little state support, and access to modern equipment and international research was limited. Mendeleev often felt constrained by these conditions. Then, in 1859, a major opportunity appeared. He was selected for a government-funded program that allowed him to study for 3 years at the University of Heidelberg in Germany. This period became one of the most transformative chapters of his life. During his time in Germany, Mendeleev worked with leading figures in analytical science and absorbed a vast amount of knowledge. 2 of the most influential were Gustav Kirchhoff and Robert Bunsen, who advanced the field of spectroscopy and discovered the elements cesium and rubidium. In September 1860, Mendeleev attended the first international chemistry conference in Europe, held in Karlsruhe, Germany. There he was deeply influenced by discussions on the distinction between atomic weight and molecular weight, as well as the chemical structure theories proposed by French and Italian chemists. The conference also allowed him to build connections with scientists across Europe and clarify the future direction of his own research. During this era, new elements were being discovered rapidly: thallium in 1861, indium in 1863, and the discoveries of cesium and rubidium. These findings strengthened Mendeleev's belief that the elements of nature were not a random collection but must follow an underlying order. After finishing his studies abroad, he returned to St. Petersburg, began teaching again, and devoted himself fully to research. It was here that he produced the work that would change the history of science, the creation of the periodic table. In the next episode, we will explore how Mendeleev built the periodic table, the love stories that shaped his life, and the journey that led him to his final days. I hope you will join me again. Alright, that wraps up today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time with another interesting story.